Welcome back, everybody, to Holistic Christian Prayer. I'm glad that you guys are here with me on this episode. I'm actually very excited for it because we finally get into troubleshooting some stuff. We finally get into maybe setting things up for the first time. I am just so excited. I don't want to wait anymore. So basically, last time it occurred to me after finishing that last episode that I needed to set aside a standalone episode on two of the suggestions that I gave you. I do plan to provide episodes that expand on some of the other suggestions that I gave you, but for this episode, we're going to take a look at when and where we decide to pray. I don't know for sure if New Year's resolutions are something that people outside of the United States participate in or know about. So for those of you listening outside the US, and I thank those of you listening, I will briefly tell you about them. New Year's resolutions are declarations made at the start of the year of things that we are committing ourselves to changing. Or at least that's what they're supposed to be. In reality, for most of us, New Year's resolutions are more like a short list of things we tell ourselves and others that we'd like to change, but don't actually plan to change. Common New Year's resolutions are things like improve fitness, stopping bad habits like smoking, going on more vacations, being more charitable, spending more time with the family, and at least in Christian circles, to read their Bible more and to pray more. In a way, it's ironic that most of us treat New Year's resolutions more like personal wish lists of changes and less like a list of things we are committed to changing, because that's what the definition of resolution is. According to Oxford Languages, the definition of resolution is, quote, a firm decision to do or not do something, end quote. Many of us have shopped online at some point, and if you've ever shopped on Amazon's website for anything, you've probably added an item or two to your wish list. But what is a wish list? It's a list of things we'd like to have, but we can't afford on our own, or something that we like to have but aren't willing to pay for ourselves in order to have it. It's a list of things that we say we want, but that we're hoping someone else will pay for us to have. So what happens with our New Year's resolutions when they are treated more like a personal wish list? Well, the same thing that happens with our wish list most of the time. Those items on the list remain there indefinitely. We decide to pay the price for the item, maybe, or we delete it from the wish list. There is one important difference between our online wish lists and most of our New Year's resolutions. No matter how many years we repeat the same things in our New Year's resolutions, no one else can pay to give us what we want. I say most of our New Year's resolutions because from time to time, people put things in their New Year's resolutions that can be purchased with money. But the vast majority of New Year's resolutions are things that can only be obtained by our own efforts or by the generosity of the Lord. It should go without saying, but just in case it's not clear, we can't treat our New Year's resolutions like we do our online shopping wish list. After all, if a resolution is defined as a firm decision to do or not do something, how can we call our resolutions if the firmness of our decision to call them resolutions was no more firm than our decision to add something to our wish list? Resolutions are firm decisions, and firm decisions make plans resolutely. Wish lists are lists of wishes, and what is wished for isn't planned for. To say that another way, instead of this weird poetic way I just did it, we can't call something a resolution if in truth we are doing nothing more than declaring a desire, like we do with items on a wish list. So I know the new year is still a ways away, but it's something to consider as it approaches. My true reason for talking about New Year's resolutions is to draw a parallel to our commitment to prayer. Like New Year's resolutions, we should declare to ourselves and others what we want for our prayer life. Unlike New Year's resolutions, we shouldn't declare them with any hope that someone else will pay for us to have them, like the items we put on our wish list. And our attempts to establish a regular time of prayer in our lives can fail for the same reasons that we fail to gain the things we put on our list of resolutions. The number one reason why they fail is we don't plan. Benjamin Franklin once said, "By failing to plan, you are preparing to fail." People over time ended up rephrasing that statement to be, failing to plan is simply planning to fail. And Eleanor Roosevelt said, "It takes as much energy to wish as it does to plan." These quotes encapsulate the 2 points I'm making now. The first point is, a lot of the time, our New Year's resolutions are things that we don't get for the same reason we fail to establish a regular time of prayer. We don't plan for it. We need to plan when and where we will have our time of regular prayer. We have to put it in our schedules, just like we put in business meetings, doctor appointments, and vacations. If we don't plan for when and where we will pray, then it's the same as planning not to pray. The second point is, it doesn't really take much more initial effort to plan for our times of regular prayer than it does to wish for just about anything. Even in wishing for something, we imagine ourselves having it and what our lives would be like. In wishing for something, we expend energy, but without any hope of getting what we wish for. And therefore, the energy we use in wishing is wasted. But if we instead plan for something, we do the same amount of imagining that we do in wishing, but with planning, there's at least some hope of getting what we plan for. Think of it this way: wishing always ends in energy lost and only increases your sense of longing for something. Except in fairy tales, wishing has never produced what's wished for. Sorry, Pinocchio fans. Not every plan ends in success, but every success, except for by some stroke of luck, always involved a plan. It can be disheartening to fail despite our planning, but if we can accept failure as a stepping stone to success, then we can plan again and again until we achieve what we desire. I'm going to push you here and make a somewhat bold statement. We prove what we really want by what we continue making plans to have. Maybe that's not super clear. I'll repeat it and then I'll say it a different way. We prove what we really want by what we continue making plans to have. So those things that we really want, we relentlessly pursue, even in the face of repeated failure. Those things that we only say we want, we don't plan for at all. And when our desire for something is strong enough to plan for, but not strong enough to endure failure, we allow that desire to go back onto our wish list. When our desire is strong enough to bring plans to life, as well as persevere through setbacks and failures, then at long last, we might have what we desired. Wishing can't do it. It won't do it. It's unable to produce that. Unable to produce anything that we wish for. It's only when we plan for what we want that there's any hope at all that we will have it. And so it is with prayer. It's the same story. So in a way, I'm asking you to find the answer to some questions for yourself. The first question is, how badly do you really want a time of regular prayer? Now I want to remind you here, only being 100% honest is going to be of any benefit to you. Okay? God isn't shocked or angered if the answer is not very much. And neither am I. I'm not shocked by it either. I'm not angry if that is your answer. So let your answer be honest. You know, nobody else has to even know about it. These are questions for you right now to answer for yourself. If you find your desires lacking, not strong enough yet to bring plans to life, then simply confess that to God right now or the next time you go to pray. And ask in humility for His help. I promise you, it's a prayer that He answers. The second question is, are you ready to start planning to pray? This is a simple yes or no. It's a question of, will you start to do this or not? If the answer is no, in the same way, confess that to God in prayer now or in your next time of prayer and ask for His help. The third question is, can you accept failures, move past them, and continue planning until you have what you want? So can you accept failures, move past them, and continue planning until you have what you want? I know it's kind of like a multi-question in one question on that last one. But it's a question of perseverance. Can you persevere? Will you keep going and pursuing what it is that you want? Will you continue to construct new plans to get the thing that you say you want? That's basically what that question is. So related to that last question, I wanted to share a personal note. We'll go just for a moment on a little tangent. I personally struggle with not letting failure prevent me from planning and trying again for what I desire. As someone with ADHD, I have experienced a lot of failure. And so it's hard for me to not add it to the trash heap of failure in my mind and feel like a failure myself. Also, as a person with ADHD, I've found that I have to make additional plans that others who don't have ADHD aren't required to make. I used to feel a bit like a victim, complaining that I had to work so much harder to do simple things that others can do without conscious effort. I used to see my situation as an excuse for failing, or for not even trying in the first place. I eventually learned that this was a futile exercise. All it did for me was provide an excuse to be bitter and not try. I never once got anything I wanted by entertaining this way of thinking. But God has been very good to me by patiently teaching me the importance of planning and strengthening me. In times when I encountered setbacks and failures, I asked God for help, and He was there. I was surprised and delighted to discover that He longed for me to be out of the misery that I was in. I feel confident that any of you listening can find the same in your relationship with God. Okay? So regardless of what your answers are to these three questions, I want you to know that God is able and willing and ready to help you. If you can push past the pride, you can step out of denial and you can say, yes, this is the true state of where I'm at. No, I don't desire. I'm not really ready to plan to pray, and I'm not really good with failure. All right, cool. That, step one, admit all of those things, ask Him for His help, and expect His help because He will bring it. Just want to share that with you as somebody who's gone through a lot of failure and has to have plans for His plans. It can be really disheartening when you have to, again, go to the drawing board and create a new plan for the thing that you have time and time again failed to obtain. And so if you're feeling disheartened, I get it. If you feel like you don't want to keep trying, I get that too. But just know that God is able and willing and available to you to help you with all of it in the same way that He's helped me. And finally, we have to actually put prayer into our schedule the same as we schedule anything else in our life. Otherwise, it's kind of floating in our heads as a non-real time, as something that can be easily dropped. Once you know the answers to these three questions, you can at last begin to plan. But what do we plan? If we want to have a regular time of prayer, we have to think of everything related to when and where. There's a time and place for everything. So, what will be the time and place that you will have your regular time of prayer? Without question, the most popular time of day that Christians choose to pray is early in the morning. This is because as followers of Jesus, we are called to emulate the way He lived His life. In Scripture, Jesus is described as having a regular practice of prayer early in the morning, even before the sun has risen. Many of the early church fathers also strongly encourage believers to have daily times of prayer in the morning before the start of one's day. The church fathers were individuals within the first few centuries of church history that helped shape and refine Christian theology and thought and religious practice. They were instrumental in figuring out many of the difficulties in theology and philosophy and dealing with the philosophical attacks that were being launched against the church in the early church years, the first couple hundred years, first couple hundreds of years, I should say. So yeah, those guys were in favor of the early morning prayer time before the start of your workday. Many pastors and biblical teachers today still strongly encourage prayer in the morning. Beyond just emulating Jesus, the morning is often chosen for prayer for many other reasons. The first of which is early morning prayer serves as a way of showing devotion to God and to their faith by placing it high up in one's priority list and having it be the very first thing a believer does in their day, sometimes even before eating breakfast. Secondly, it is presumed that a person will be well rested and alert in the morning because they have normal sleep patterns and sleep normal times like normal people. I'm not one of them. And therefore, those people are most capable of being focused on their worship of and communion with God in their time of prayer. In the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, there is an idea of sacrificing to God the best of what one has to Him, often referred to as the firstfruits, as a way of showing love and devotion to God. Waking up early and giving God our attention in the morning can also be viewed as a way of offering God the firstfruits of our energy, time, and focus. Praying in the morning before the start of one's day is also said to be an excellent way for the believer to center their mind on the Lord so that they are more open to Him throughout the day. Others say that morning prayer prepares the believer's heart to reject temptations to sin, while also inclining their hearts to behave in a Christ-like way throughout the day. There are, of course, other benefits to early morning prayer. For one thing, there are positive mental benefits to it. Just do a quick Google search and you'll see that it can help with lowering stress, decreasing anxiety and depression, and increase a person's ability to be mindful throughout the day, to be mentally present and alert with what's going on in the moment. Routines, such as being in a routine of regular prayer, can also be beneficial to the mind. Specifically, it can help us emotionally regulate, which is to keep our emotions in control. They are in regular, normal patterns. And they can also help us manage emotions that we otherwise would find overwhelming. And of course, there's all sorts of benefits that differ from person to person as we individually encounter God in our prayers. We all have a unique individual relationship with God, and so the way that He personally delights us, personally comforts us, and reveals important truths that we need to know about ourselves and others and Himself is going to be different from person to person. And so the time of day that we pick for our prayer can be very important in the way that God communicates to us. Even though morning is the most popular option, it's not the only option. I encourage the majority of people listening to do their best to adopt the morning as their time of prayer. I know it won't be possible for everyone, but if you can find a way to make your time of prayer to be in the morning, I highly encourage you to do it. There are countless benefits in selecting it for your time of regular prayer. However, I recognize it's not going to be feasible or even ideal for everybody. It's not going to be a time that's going to work out for them. I have personally tried to establish a regular prayer time in the morning many times, but I've been unsuccessful. For as long as I can remember, it takes me up to like 2.5 hours to fully wake up and overcome the intense grogginess and mental fog that rolls over me every morning. This is true, by the way, regardless of how much or how little I sleep or how consistently that sleep is. Coffee does not shorten my delayed waking phase either. I can't just pop up off the bed and drink some coffee and that grogginess go away. That has no effect on that. It's literally about 2.5 hours that I'm barely capable of dressing and feeding myself, let alone harnessing my focus enough to present an intelligible and respectful word to the Lord of the universe. And, maybe not everyone's going to share this point of view, but for me, I want to be awake and able to focus when I go into prayer. So for these reasons and for some others, I have opted to pray during a different time of the day. But here's the thing, it's as consistent as I can make it. I pray before and after work, as well as during random times throughout the day. But I plan on before and after work every day for at least half an hour. So now we get into the considerations for how do you go about picking the time that you're going to pray. The first thing you got to figure out is, how long am I going to pray? And I think that there is a tendency for many people who are maybe overzealous or just very excited and wanting to really be digging deep into their relationship. They bite off way more than they can chew. I've definitely done that. I am still learning how to take things in chunks that are reasonable for me to try to address. So in terms of how long you are going to pray, I would maybe think about, okay, well, how long have I been a Christian? Am I already in a practice of doing, regular prayer? If so, what has my time range been about? How long do I usually spend in prayer? Okay. But if you are newer to prayer, or maybe this is your first time doing it, trying to have regular, consistent prayer, every day or every other day or however often you can, I would say less is more. Start with what you know for sure, bare minimum, you can commit to. Start with shorter amounts of prayer time, because there's a thing, at least with people with ADHD, we don't gauge time very well. So if we tell ourselves that we are going to do something for a certain amount of time, the way that we experience the passage of that time is going to be very different based on all kinds of different things, like our alertness, whether or not we've had our medication, and the task itself. Is it boring? Is it interesting? Is it have anything to do with any of our passions or interests? Typically ends up happening is people with ADHD, we take on way more than we can really handle. And what that does is it increases kind of some pressure to get things done. And some of us operate very well under that kind of pressure. And some of us even do that deliberately to create that pressure on ourselves to get us to do the things. But my recommendation would be, if you've had a lot of difficulty setting in a routine of prayer, and maybe you're finding, especially if you tend to get distracted really often and you are bothered by the fact that you can't sit there for more than 5 minutes without getting distracted, bring down the amount, your minimum length of prayer. So you say, I'm going to pray for at least this long, and that's what I'm going to commit to. And set the bar low, especially if it's been an area of struggle for you before. You're going to also want to consider your ability to focus. So whatever time slot you pick for your time of prayer, you're going to want to think about, how are you feeling energy-wise, and how able are you to harness your focus? Are you able to tune out distractions really easily right now at the time slot that you picked, or not? Imagine the time slot that you are considering for your time of prayer, and you have to be able to look at it and think very clearly about, okay, at this time, this is usually about how I feel energy-wise. This is about how much energy I feel given this time of day. What's going on during that time of day? What am I usually concerned with? What am I thinking about? What are my responsibilities at that time? And also, how is my ability to focus? So you have to think a little bit about what you're typically involved with at the time that you're considering. Because if you don't do that, chances are you're going to run into obstacles, and it's going to be all the more frustrating when you run into them, because, well, you did the work of planning your time to be in prayer, but at least at the time that you were picking the time slot, you weren't considering these factors. So if you're picking early morning prayer, but you're finding that you are just overwhelmed with a high number of things to do, that might not be the best time for you to pick. Or if you're finding, you don't have a ton of responsibilities, but for whatever reason, you're just not able to reel in your focus, maybe pick a different time. Although, again, I do encourage the majority of people to pick morning as their time of prayer. But you have to do a little bit of that thinking. What's going on at the time that I'm considering for my prayer session? During this time slot, what am I thinking about? What am I involved in doing? Can I really put other things off to the side and focus on prayer during this time or not? And am I just way too exhausted, both mentally and physically or whatever it is, to be able to engage in prayer in a way that you find to be meaningful and satisfying and something where you think you can really be present for? So you do have to kind of sit down and think about the time slot itself. How am I feeling energy-wise? How's my focus? And am I going to be too overly concerned with other things that are pressing and weighing in on my mind to really be able to do this at this time? If you can't overcome all the little things that might hang you up, all the things that might make that time slot unfeasible for you, then do consider picking a different time. But if you can make mornings work for you, I highly suggest using the mornings as a time to center yourself and be focused and meet with the Lord. So for example, if you're picking early morning, but you are the parent that's getting the kids all dressed and getting them fed and all that stuff, it might not be a good idea to try to schedule your prayer time just before you take the kids to school kind of thing. Because it's hard to gauge everything that's going to happen in between. So think about when I go to pray at this time that I'm picking, what's going to be happening before and after that might make me too tired or distracted to really be invested in my time in prayer. Also think about during the time that I'm picking, how likely is it that I'm going to be interrupted by someone, and by who? Is there any way I can tell these people in advance that I will be busy, or is there a way that I can make myself unavailable? You're going to want to decrease. Here's another thing to consider. You're going to want to decrease or eliminate the distractions in your environment that you'll be praying in. The biggest culprit is going to be your phone and if you've got a laptop, put everything on silent. Put your phone not just on silent with the vibrate, but like all the way silent, no vibration, and set out like an actual kitchen timer that's separate that you can see counting down or up, and start it and pray for your selected amount of time. I also recommend having the Bible out. This is just a general prayer practice. Have your Bible out, be reading it, be inquiring in prayer about what you're reading, and ask God to reveal truths to you. So that's just another little note. Have the Bible out. Next thing you're going to want to think about is your commitment level. And this is in terms of, I want prayer. I want to have a routine of prayer at this time that I'm considering so badly that I will push other things out of the way. I'm that committed that I will give up these other things that I could put in that same time slot for prayer. So what are you willing to give up in order to have your time of prayer? And maybe there's nothing competing for your time at that time, and that might be actually a good reason to pick the time. There is no competing commitments in the way. You don't have to worry about having to choose one over the other. Next thing you're going to want to do is compare the commitment level of other things that you're committed to and ask yourself in a very honest way if what you're considering can actually be implemented into your schedule. Again, biting off more than you can chew is not generally helpful. Like, start small and increase your time over time if that's what you want to do. Going back to like the New Year's resolution thing, people often drop their New Year's resolutions because they're quick to make them without thinking about what changes they will have to make to their schedule. And when push comes to shove, those resolutions get pushed out by what they are already committed to, and anything else that calls for their immediate attention. The initial commitment to the resolution was too weak, and a plan to keep their resolution was not worked into their schedule. The same is true of prayer. So here's another fun ADHD tip. I think I'm just going to start calling it like add it up, something like that, like ADD. The H in ADHD is hyperactivity, and it's not really something that's usually present in adults. It usually is something that kind of phases out as someone enters into adulthood. Usually it's a hyperactivity of the mind. So people use ADD and ADHD kind of interchangeably, but just know that the H is for hyperactivity, and if you have it or not, it doesn't really matter. But anyway, here's an added up tip. So people with ADHD, we need to have contingency plans for our plans a lot of the time. We need to have something ready and in place so that way if something goes wrong and we're not able to do what we thought we'd be able to do when we thought we'd be able to do it, for whatever reason, if the thing is really important to us, we will take the time to come up with an alternative plan and time to do the thing we originally set out to do. To say it another way, have a plan B. When it comes to your prayer time, things might go really sideways and you might not get to pray at the time that you had hoped, but have a secondary time set aside that you can pray if the first one becomes unavailable to you. When it comes to picking your time, think about these things. Your commitment level to prayer in general, the length of time that you're going to pray, start lower if staying focused is an issue for you. Think about your energy levels, the likeliness that you'll be interrupted, decrease or eliminate any distractions in your environment, or pick an environment that is already free of distractions. Use a timer that is separate from your phone or from a laptop or any other electronic device that can get onto Facebook or Twitter, Instagram, whatever. Use a separate timer. I just recommend like a really cheap kitchen timer that you can set for a certain amount of time, and it'll go off and it'll be loud, and you'll be able to know that your time of prayer is up. And you might actually be surprised that you were just kind of getting into it when the timer goes off. And then have a plan B. Have a plan B. Know that if you can't pray at this time, that doesn't mean you're going to go the whole day without praying. That you have another time set aside where you can meet with the Lord, be refreshed by Him, and spend some time in His presence. One last thing. When you choose a time of regular prayer, put it into your calendar's phone or your computer's calendar. Put it in the calendar on your phone or the computer, the time that you're going to pray. And if you have ADHD, or if it's just something that tends to get kind of pushed and brushed aside all the time, pushed off to the side, then set some reminders. When we don't want to miss a doctor appointment, or we don't want to accidentally be late for a date with some romantic partner, we set reminders. We do a lot to guard that time. In the same way, if you set aside time to spend with your kids or with some family member, and somebody asks you, hey, can we go do this thing at this time? And it's for the same time as whatever you already have planned. If you really want to stay committed to your original plan, you say, no, I'm sorry, I already have something planned. And so you're kind of guarding that time against other things. We have to have the same kind of attitude with prayer. We have to be like, sorry, I have an appointment. And in fact, some people even recommend saying that to people. Sorry, no, I'll be busy at that time. I have an appointment. I won't be available. You can say it. They don't need to know all the details. Just let them know they're going to be busy. But put it in your calendar and utilize technology to help you, especially if you have ADHD. Set those reminders. So now that you guys have some ideas on how to choose when you will pray, let's consider where you will pray. Like I already mentioned in picking a time, because we always have to think about where we're going to be at certain times, we also have to think about where we're going to be when we're praying, right? So think of both the time and the place. When we're thinking of a place, we want to pick a place that's either already free of distractions or able to have those distractions removed, or at least decreased in some way, where we can cut down the number of distractions in the room or wherever we're at. Again, I recommend putting the phone on silent without vibration, setting a separate kitchen timer, and setting it and just not refuse to pick up your phone at that point. Just you are busy. I recommend picking a private place where people are unlikely to walk in or interrupt you. If there's literally no time of the day where like you can't get some peace, like that might be where you need to like really think about how you structure your day and reconsider that, because that could be very unhealthy. And trust me, overloading your schedule can really do some damage. So if it's impossible, though, to pick a private place where people aren't going to interrupt you, inform the people that you anticipate would interrupt you and let them know that you're not going to be available. And from, again, this is why you pick your time and know what your time range is for your prayer time. Why that's so important is that way you can tell them, hey guys, I'm not going to be available between this time and this time. Please don't interrupt me. That will decrease the likelihood that you'll be interrupted. As for the place itself, it should be a place that somewhat has like a calming effect. It creates a sense of peace, and it doesn't remind you of the stressors of your work or the rest of the day. In particular, nature scenes are really popular for prayer. So if you can either be like looking out the window, out at something in the middle of nature, if you can go on a walk and kind of be like on a prayer walk, nature is a very popular option. It does create that sense of peace, closeness with God, God's creation all around you, all these things. And you also want to pick a place where you feel free to expressing your emotions. You might not think so right now, but eventually you're going to want to have a private place where you feel comfortable enough that you can cry, you can laugh, you can be yelling, you can be dancing, for joy, or you could be mad, you could be really giving God quite an earful, or whatever, just venting. You're going to want a place where you don't feel embarrassed to express yourself. So these are just some things to think about, like, what is my commitment level to this? What is my commitment level what is my commitment level for prayer compared to the commitments that I already have? If push comes to shove, am I going to have a way to keep prayer in my life? Will I have a plan B in case plan A fails? And, the place and time that you pick itself, think of who's likely to interrupt you and why, and what you can do to keep those distractions and interruptions to a minimum. So guys, there's all kinds of things to consider over this, but this is the end of the episode here. This is probably the longest one I've done so far, and it can be really hard to get into this for so many reasons. And if you guys find that the length of time that you guys have picked, you're just utterly bored the whole time, it might be that you need a different approach to how you go about doing the actual prayer itself. Maybe you want to work through a devotional, or maybe you want to incorporate more like instrumental, worship music. Maybe you ought to look into more like a regular communal prayer with other believers. But yeah, there's all kinds of things to consider here. And the first things you got to figure out is a time and place and commit to them. And then also have a backup plan in case those things go wrong. As a person with ADHD, one of the most paralyzing things, at least for me personally, is to find out that my plan, which I worked so hard on, didn't work out, and that sense of like loss over the failed plan, but also like, what do I do now, can feel so overwhelming that it just paralyzes me into doing nothing. I kind of like clam up, and it's game over until my motivation comes back, or like God, restores my sense of productivity, or whatever you want to call it. But having that backup plan can really get you out of a tough spot. Like, it's already hard enough to swallow a failure or something going wrong, but to have something already in place as a backup plan for when things go wrong just is such a blessing to have. All right, guys, so that is the end of the episode. Think of when and where. Think of your commitments. have a plan and have a plan for when your plans go wrong, and start small. The next episode is going to be probably dealing with either one of the two topics that people showed interest on in the Facebook group, and that is either going to be on doubt and prayer, or it's going to be on the topic of how do I know when it's God speaking, just my own thoughts and feelings, or when I'm hearing from the enemy. So either way, it's going to be exciting. I hope you guys listen to that episode. With that, I'll just close us out with a quick prayer. Father, we just got done with Thanksgiving, and whether that's a peaceful time or not so peaceful time, we do acknowledge that it's a time where we're supposed to be more mindful of the good things in our lives and the things that are excellent and good gifts that you give us, whether that be things or that be the people in our lives. We know that people are valuable to you and that they ought to be valuable to us. So, Lord, help us to be thankful and show appreciation for one another, not just during this time of Thanksgiving, but every day that we are around the people that we know and love, and even to those people that we struggle to love. So, Father, be with us. Keep guiding us in our prayers. Keep holding us up and strengthening us to do all that you have us to do. In Jesus' name, amen. Right on. You guys are still here, which means I think you guys like the things that you're hearing. If that's true, if you are enjoying this podcast, go ahead and like or subscribe, rate or review this podcast, and that would be incredible. Not only would that personally encourage me to keep going, it also makes it easier for other podcast listeners to find this podcast. So go ahead and do that, help this podcast out, and I hope to hear from you guys soon. In the meantime, keep praying.